Welcome to Center Stage. My name is Mark Gordon. On this program, we're going to talk with composer David Lang. He was recently nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Song for his music to the film Youth. The song is Simple Song Number 3, featuring soprano Sumi Jo. Stay tuned as we go center stage with David Lang. Very excited to talk with you today. You must be excited as well to be nominated for Golden Globe for your work on Youth.
Yeah, it's very exciting because I am a classical music nerd. Being invited into the film world is very exciting for me. Paolo Sorrentino did this movie, The Great Beauty, which was the film that he did that won the Academy Award 2 years ago for Best Foreign Film. And this is an incredibly riotous film about Rome and Italy and, contemporary culture. And it's, very long and has huge amounts of music in it. And it's really jam-packed with all sorts of exciting things. And one of the things that happened in that film was that he used my music. I didn't know him. I'd never met him. I didn't write music for it. It was just music that he had heard. And he licensed it. He went to my publisher and licensed it, but I don't have to know that. So it happened kind of without my awareness. And then it turned out he had this incredibly beautiful idea that his next film, this film Youth, was going to be about a composer. So because he had used my music in the other film, he got in touch with me and said, look, I'm Paolo Sorrentino. I like your music. My next film is about a composer, and I want to talk to you about what that might mean. So the exciting thing for me was not just being invited into this project, but also being invited into the project so early. Because since the movie is about a composer, I had to write the music before the script could be finished, before the actors were cast, actually. I had to finish everything. I had to have long discussions with him, philosophical discussions about what the character could be and what music's relationship to revealing his life in the narrative would be. I mean, they were really beautiful and really, kind of fundamental conversations about the movie. And all of that had to be done before the movie could be finished, before the script could be finished, before the actors could be hired, before the shots could be lined up. It was a beautiful way to do it. It was a film that was designed from the beginning so that the music would reveal who this character was. I think one of the really beautiful things that Paolo realized, and I'm such a music booster. I think music is the most important thing in the world, and so I'm really happy that it's in this film. I think music is capable of conveying things that other things can't. And one of the things that's really interesting about music, especially live music, is that live music always exists in two places. It exists in the mind of the person when he or when the group made it at the very beginning. It's like, where was that? Who was that person? What was the experience of that person when it got made? And then when it's made in front of you live, it exists in the moment that you are in at that moment. And in classical music, those can be, 500 years apart. That moment of when it was created by someone in their environment, in a cathedral in Paris in the 1400s, it's in that moment, and then you play it now, and it's in your moment too. Both of those moments are exactly present at that time. So in a way, a piece of music, especially we think this way in classical music, a piece of music is like a time capsule. It really does have both ends of the spectrum. So what I thought was so beautiful about that for this film, and why it had to be a composer and not a playwright or an actor or a painter, is that because we are both of these places at the same time with live music, a piece of music like the song at the end is capable of showing you who this man was when he was young, when he wrote that song, when he was in love, when he was optimistic, when he had his future in front of him, when he thought that everything was going to work out okay. And it also is exactly who he was at the end of his life, where he looks back and he realizes the things that could have been changed, when he realizes his love is no longer, meaning the same thing. It's both of those things together. So for me, one of the really beautiful and emotional and difficult and powerful things for me was getting into the head of the character so that I could imagine what that would feel like to have both of those things kind of in equilibrium together. The moment when you're looking forward about all the things that you could be, and the moment when you're looking backwards and imagining all the things you thought you were going to be but weren't. So I tried to put all of that into the song at the end. It was very emotional for me because I'm not 82 years old. I had to imagine what will life be like at the end of my days, when I am disappointed and when love is not the same and when I will be counting my years and what will that feel like for me? So I really had to get into his mind. I really tried to think about love because that's what the movie is about. It's using his relationship to his life as kind of like a measurement of his life. It's the love and the change in love that spans his life. And so that's a good thing. So I really wanted it to feel this kind of bittersweet thing that has a resolution at the end that makes it feel complete.
Harvey Keitel says this in the film. He looks at this young girl, right, and he says, "That is your future, and that is the past." And it's a timeline. Have you ever done that? Have you ever, and maybe with working on this film, you looked at your timeline in terms of where it was when you began, where you are today, and where you're going? Have you thought about that? And what do you see at the end?
Well, it's something that happens to composers all the time. I think it probably happens to people in all sorts of creative disciplines. But what happens in music is, I'm 58 right now. I have pieces which are played around the world right now that I wrote almost 40 years ago, and people still play them. So I go to concerts and or I see people playing them, and it's a very strange feeling to know that here is this little record of what you were thinking and feeling right as you're starting out. And even from this distance, hopefully I have some years left. But even at this distance, I listen back and I think I know so much more about the world. I know so much more about what music can do than I knew then. When you're young, you're trying to impress people, you're trying to show off, you're trying to prove to people that you deserve to be in the field. As you grow up, you have so many other experiences and so many other disappointments. I have my students now. I teach at Yale. I have these great students, and occasionally some student who's in the early 20s will come in and write a piece about some heavy subject, and I'll ask them, how many times has your heart been broken? How many people do you know who have passed away? You shouldn't deal with these heavy subjects until you have experienced them in life. But I didn't know that when I was young. I thought I'm trying to take on the world. I'm trying to do as many things as possible. Now I really have a sense that the music is about expressing these powerful things that happen in your life, and you don't have any place to put those emotions. You don't have any opportunity to think about them and pay attention to them and meditate about them and really understand how powerful they are. So to me, that's what music is good for. I think what's going to happen is as all these more powerful experiences, powerful good and powerful bad happen to me, the music is going to be the place where those experiences are going to go.
Back in the day, you lived in Los Angeles and you worked at Warehouse Music as well as the National Theater.
Yeah.
Tell me how that really had an impact on you as a composer.
When you are interested in classical music, you start with Beethoven and you start with Mozart normally, whatever. And if you get interested in weirder music, the music of living composers and especially experimental composers, you start feeling like you may be the only person in the world who likes this stuff, or there may be like a small handful of people who are really listening to the things that you're listening to. I had this job my senior year in high school. I was working in a record store. I got completely into weird music and experimental classical music. And then I had this job working at a movie theater, and I thought these are two separate things that will never meet: film music and the music that I liked. And we had the premiere of The Exorcist. We were the only theater in the world at that moment that had it. It was the complete launch of this film. The entire world went crazy over this because no one was prepared for movies which were that terrifying yet. And one of the things that made that movie so terrifying was the incredible music. The music was amazing. And all of the music was by these very, at the moment, kind of obscure, revolutionary, questioning, experimental composers from America, from Europe, from England. And they were people that in my other life, I was only becoming aware of them. And then to sort of hear their music used beautifully in this film and used in a way so that the audience actually needed that music, that was an incredible revelation for me. I thought that this music was really just for a handful of people and for strange experiences and for impressing yourself with how arcane your knowledge was. And here it was being telegraphed to the world and very useful and very necessary. So it was a very exciting experience. I would go home from the movie theater and I would just sit at my piano and I would just play, I would improvise over Tubular Bells for hours. Incredible.
Tell me about the genesis of Death Speaks.
Again, I'm a classical music person, right? So this great composer, Franz Schubert, who lived in the early 19th century in Vienna, had a very miserable and short life, wrote incredibly beautiful songs, some of the greatest songs ever. He wrote them for a small circle of friends, and a lot of them are very intense, and a lot of them are very kind of hyper emotional. But one of the things that's really interesting is that death is a character in some of his songs. So one of his most famous songs is a song called Death and the Maiden. And in this song, the girl sings about, how she doesn't want to die. And then Death comes in and sings this very beautiful and seductive little song telling her how great it is going to be when he takes her away. So a lot of these songs actually has Death as a character. And so I just wondered what it would be like if I just took all the moments in all the Schubert songs where death is saying something to us, and I made a little narrative of things that death is saying to us in our own language, so we might understand who death is, at least to Schubert and his audience, and to the Romantic audience, and to Goethe, and to this entire world. So I went through all 613 Schubert songs, and I just found, oh, here's a little moment where death is saying something to us, and I found 32 places where death is a character. I took them all in order in the German. I translated them and then I polished them so that they all went nicely to each other. And I made some of them a little more flowery. But it's basically just all these places where Schubert is telling us, if death could speak, this is what he would say. And then I thought what was really beautiful is Schubert made these things for a little tiny environment of people listening, sometimes only 10 people at a time. And I thought, where do we have this environment now? We don't hear it in classical music so much, but in pop clubs, we're used to indie pop. You go to a little club where there are 50 people and you hear somebody singing something emotional and from their heart. So I thought, who are people who are in the indie pop world who started in classical music and now made their careers in indie pop? So the singer for this song cycle is Shara Worden from My Brightest Diamond. The guitarist is Bryce Dessner, who's one of the founders of the National. The violinist is Owen Pallett, who's in Arcade Fire. And the pianist is the composer and pianist Nico Muhly, who is a composer who is everywhere, but who became successful because of his work with Björk and Sigur Rós and people like that, and Grizzly Bear. And so I thought I'm going to take these people who started in classical music, then went to making songs in pop music, and I'm going to invite them back in to sing these incredible, beautiful, delicate songs about death.
Let's move into another piece that you worked on, The Difficulty of Crossing a Field.
The Difficulty of Crossing a Field is an opera. I call it an opera, and it was commissioned by the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and Carrie Perloff, who's the director there, commissioned it. I was composer in residence, and there was a playwright in residence there, Mac Wellman, who's a kind of legendary, incomprehensible downtown New York playwright, amazing playwright. And so she commissioned us to do a project together. And Mac came up with the idea of taking this short story by Ambrose Bierce, who was this great 19th century American writer. And the story is called The Difficulty of Crossing a Field. It's less than a page long. And it's a story which is very confusing. It's about a man who is a slave-owning plantation owner before the Civil War. He walks out across his field in front of his house, and he disappears in plain view of everyone around him, and no one ever finds out what happens to him again. But you hear some rumors about what might have happened to him, and you never find out. It's just sort of this weird disappearance. Ambrose Bierce is also famous because he wrote the story, which, when it got translated into Japanese, became the basis for the movie Rashomon. So that idea of having a story which is told from several different perspectives, none of which have the complete truth and all of which disagree. Mack followed this through in this opera. So there are 7 different stories on this plantation from 7 different points of view about what happened to this man. No one ever agrees. No one can ever say what happens. But the most interesting thing is there's a woman, Mrs. Williamson, the man's wife. And what's interesting is that her complete identity disappears because she's only described in the story as Mrs. Williamson. When Mr. Williamson disappears, who is Mrs. Williamson? She doesn't even have a name any longer. Everyone's relationships, just sort of pulling this man out of this environment, everyone's relationships in this community completely fall apart. And so that's what the opera is about. Mrs. Williamson is already crazy. You know, it says in the original story that she saw her husband disappear and was driven insane by what happened, so she was not allowed to testify at the inquest, trying to figure out what happened to her. So in our version, she is the only person who speaks poetry because she is, she's supposed to be insane, so she gets the best part. What happens here is that it's on a slave plantation. So eventually the leader of the slaves is a woman named Virginia Creeper, and she begins to call the names of the slaves to come and witness this woman going crazy.
In listening to your music and speaking with you, there seems to be this notion of uncertainty, the uncertainty of death, the uncertainty of getting older, and the uncertainty of love. Let's talk a little bit about Love Fail. That's another recording that you did. Talk to me about this notion of uncertainty and how it resonates with you in your music.
I think it's just a personal interest in how I look at my field. It's like I'm very curious about things, and I feel like music is the perfect place to push your curiosity. Music is about emotion, and it's about communication of emotion between people. It's kind of like also a really great laboratory for figuring out the things that you wish you knew the answers to in life, but don't. Where is death? What happens there? Who knows? It's like you can't actually prove it. You can't examine it scientifically. Music is the perfect place to find that. The same thing with love, the same thing with life, the same thing with how people could form a better society. It's like how people organize themselves. I'm curious about them, and I feel like because I'm a musician, I use this as my laboratory to figure out what I'm curious about. So the thing about Love Fail, which is interesting, is it began with this very peculiar thought, which is that in classical music, we talk about the story of Tristan and Isolde, which is a famous opera by Wagner. It's regarded as being one of the greatest love stories ever. And of course, it's a medieval study which goes all the way back. I think the first writing of it is in the 11th century. There are written scraps of it about this kind of forbidden love, which begins because these two people who weren't supposed to fall in love drink a love potion. And I always think is, why do we like these things? What's great about these epics? And I think we talk about this as the greatest tragic love story. But the truth is, I'm in love. I have a wife. My life is going to end. My wife's life is going to end. My love is going to end. Why isn't my life more tragic to me than Tristan's and Isolde's life? My love story is the real tragedy. So why am I paying so much attention, and why does music pay so much attention and culture pay so much attention to the fact that there are all these things outside of us trying to distract us from paying attention to the fact that we have these things going on in our own lives? I just was trying to think, what is the difference between this old thing, this old classic story, and our own lives, our own modern lives, trying to pay attention to ourselves? I think a lot of things that happen in life are about trying to keep us from noticing how we feel, to keep us from noticing how we should really be paying attention to our relationships to each other and to our communities and our children and our spouses and our society. We like these big epics because they take some responsibility away from ourselves, quite honestly. They allow us to not pay attention to how we could be better people. It's an odd thing. Project outside yourself. Here's this great tragedy over there. You don't have to pay attention to your own emotional life. I happen to like to pay attention to my own emotional life, and because I think that's what music communicates, I feel like that's my job. I tried to do was to take things in Love Fail which were from the old and from the new. rewriting all these different old versions of the Tristan story from all these different sources. And I put them against stories by the great American writer Lydia Davis, who writes in very short style. Her things are sort of, sometimes referred to as micro story or micro prose, because they're very short. And because of that, they're able very quickly to make things which are very intense and pointed. And I thought I would take these stories and relate them to each other, and somehow we would be able to find ourselves in the ground covered between them.
How do you continue to challenge yourself and continue to push for new levels of your music?
I think the more I know, the more I listen to other music, the more I read, the more theater I see, the more movies I see, the more art I see, the more questions it raises to me about things that we could do differently. So things that we take for granted. At this point, I look at my curiosity as where I get most of my ideas. I allow myself, when I see other people's work, to ask as many deep and ridiculous questions about it as I possibly can. So I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to challenge myself and to do things which are different. All of my pieces, as I think you have now noticed since you played these different pieces on this show, they're from different worlds. They sound like different things. They engage different topics. I like the idea that I wake up in the morning and I don't think today's job is to continue the work I did yesterday, so I continue it again tomorrow. I think yesterday I looked at this issue and I'm done with that. And now today I'm going to look at a completely different issue and try to solve it differently. So I actually like the idea that I have music in all different kinds of styles, that I have music in all different kinds of genres. I consider myself an opera composer if I have to, define it. I have an opera premiering at LA Opera in June. And this is an opera on a very different topic. It's called Anatomy Theater, which I did with the visual artist Mark Dion. And it's an opera which takes place in 17th century England, where a woman comes out and confesses her crime of having killed her husband and 2 children. Then we hang her. And then we take her into an anatomy theater, and she is dissected in front of an audience of medical students and voyeurs. And we dissect her not for scientific knowledge, but we dissect her for moral knowledge. Because in the 17th century and 18th century, there were Christian lecturers who would go around and they would dissect criminals and look at their parts of their body, looking for evidence of evil and for corruption in their organs. So it's actually about the pursuit of evil. Where is evil located in our society? Where is evil located in our beings? How does evil propagate itself? But it's also a comedy, because, of course, through the mystery of opera, this woman, we dissect her, and then she, miraculously keeps singing for the rest of the opera. So I'm really looking forward to that. It premieres in June, which is going to be super fun. But again, it's like I've never done anything with that. It's a collaboration with a visual artist, which is super fun. So I like to set up problems which seem like they might end up someplace interesting if you try to solve them, and then I try to solve them. My first opera, I read a giant opera for Santa Fe many years ago, which I really enjoyed. And it was an opera about the Victorian art critic John Ruskin. And my collaborators, who were much more experienced in opera, would tell me all the time, no one has ever made a successful opera about an intellectual. And, they're probably right. So after that, somebody has to disappear, has to die, has to be killed. You need some drama, but it should be really fun.
And LA Opera is it's such a great venue too. Who else would do The Fly?
Yeah, that was great.
Maybe it didn't work, but people either loved it or even the Grendel. Grendel was.
I think whether it works or not is not the issue with art. Actually, I think trying things is really of value, and having an experience you've never had before is of great value, even if you decide you never want to have it again. I think one of the weird things, and again, it's like I think about this for classical music. It's like classical music, we get this way because we love the music of the past. There's so much great music which has been written in the past. And we love it so much that we forget that music was new, that people made that stuff for the first time, that people went to an audience They never heard this piece before. They never knew that composer. Who was that composer, Beethoven? I don't think he's going to make it. I mean, it's like people heard these things for the first time. And so they experienced these pieces with risk and with excitement and a kind of electricity of not knowing what's coming. And I think that that's what our institutions need to keep doing is they need to keep giving us things where we don't know. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be exciting? Will it live? Will it die? Who can say? Have I ever had this before? Having an experience you've never had before makes you a better person, even though um, it may not be an experience you ever want to have again.
It seems like that's how you start your day, with that sense. Once again, we're back to that sense of unknowing. What
Yeah,
is
I
the
love.
day going to bring? I mean, do you set up like a structure for yourself in terms of goals, what you want to accomplish, or do you just kind of go with what arises?
I have a list of probably 100 pieces that I am hoping to write before I die. And I spend a huge amount of time thinking about things that I'm really curious about and I really want to pursue. And then when someone asks me if I would like to write a piece for them, I go down my list and I go, oh, yeah, well, this one, that's pretty close to what they asked me. I'm going to ask them if they'll let me do this crazy thing. And, recently people have been letting me do the crazy things.
What has been said about your work that you like, and what is the things that have been said that you thought, why did they say that, and is it easy to deal with criticism?
I don't know. Criticism is always really difficult because, basically, the criticism that you really want in the world is this is interesting. You should check it out. I mean, when I was younger, I thought my greatest goal was I really wanted someone to review a piece of mine and call it muscular and inventive. And I used to write pieces, for years. I would keep thinking, I'm writing this piece in the hopes that someone will refer to it as muscular and inventive, and no one, of course, ever did. But basically, I think all people in the creative disciplines want is to be respected, is to be taken seriously. I think probably all people. So that's all anybody wants. Of course, it's always nice when you open up a review and it says you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. But that also means that you can live in a world where you can open up the review and the reviewer might say, this is terrible, don't ever see it. All reviews should be this person is trying to accomplish something. I'm going to try to figure out what this person's trying to accomplish, and I'm going to try to tell you in the best way I possibly can what this person's trying to accomplish. And did it work? Well, you have to check it out yourself.
You talked about with the working on youth, where you had to kind of inhabit Michael Caine's character and to get into his mind. Is that how you approach composition in terms of now with the new opera? Did you try to get into the mind of that woman or the mind of those voyeurs and surgical students?
I think that's the most fun part about writing opera for me is that I think in order to do a good job, you have to project yourself into those characters. So even though they may be completely despicable and horrible people, you end up sitting in your studio trying to imagine, or at least I end up sitting in my studio trying to imagine how to be the best despicable person I can be. For example, the moral lecturer in anatomy theater, the person who goes around traveling from town to town, causing these people to be opened up, he has to really believe that he is in pursuit of truth. We know that he is wrong, but he doesn't know that. So for me, the really beautiful thing was how do you convince yourself that you are right, that you're doing this moral good, that you're doing something which is of positive value to all the people around you, when you know, when we know, when the viewer knows that you are wrong. It was unbelievably exciting for me to be able to try to show who that person was. I'm not interested in making people who are cartoons so that I can make fun of them. And I think that was one of the beautiful things about youth. I thought it was such a great gift that someone of such a great stature as Paolo Sorrentino wanted to make a movie about a composer. I wanted the music to work for the Michael Caine character the way it works for me. I really wanted it to feel like music is the way that he organizes his emotional life, that he gets in touch with himself, that he communicates with himself. So I had these great conversations with Paolo from the very beginning, before the script was finished, about where music should go in this and how music would point to him and how his music was just for him. Music for him is privacy. He has conversations with people about all these kinds of day-to-day things and boring things and other people's lives. But when he's listening to his own music, or when he's in the forest conducting cows, it's such a beautiful scene. What he's really doing there is he's trying to pay attention to his own emotional life. And music is the only way to get into it. And so I love that film gave me the opportunity to do it. But I do think that that's the beauty of writing opera, or writing things for characters, is that you try to inhabit them as honestly, with as much emotional honesty as you can.
Just a reminder, you can listen to Center Stage every Tuesday night on KXLU Los Angeles, 88.9 FM. We're also streaming on the internet at kxlu.com. Until next time, this is Mark Gordon, and I'll see you Center Stage.